Hi, I'm Rick McKeon, and I would like to welcome you to this series of lessons on how to play the three-string cigar box guitar. These lessons accompany my latest book of the same name, How to Play the Three-String Cigar Box Guitar. So I just want to give you a quick overview of what these lessons are going to consist of. Chapter number 1, the basics. We talk about strings and tuning, and how we choose the appropriate strings for the cigar box guitar for the tuning that you're using. We're going to be tuned to 151 in the key of G, which is GDG, pretty popular tuning. So that determines what strings we're going to use. Out of a regular set, 6-string set, we're going to use 5, 4, and 3. That puts us really close. And we'll talk about why we choose those strings in terms of tension and projections and stuff. Also, we can talk about electric versus acoustic strings and the type of pickup that you have, or maybe you don't have any pickup at all in your cigar box guitar. I've got a little thing on changing strings, and then we'll get tuned up. You'll hear the sound of it and how to tune the strings one to another, how they relate one to another. 1.2, this I call for the audiophile. Some people, well, I guess myself included, but some people just go nuts if the pitch isn't exactly right. Well, that can be the case with a cigar box guitar. So we'll talk about bridge placement. We'll talk about the action. Many cigar box guitars are played pretty much with just a slide, so the action is pretty high. When you go to fret a note, well, you're stretching that string if the action is pretty high. So we'll talk about action. We'll talk about bending notes off pitch. 1.3 is how to read the tab. We will use tablature. Of course, we play pretty much by ear, but I'll provide the tablature for all of the exercises and the songs, just because it's a good learning tool and it's a good reference. So we'll have a section there, 1.3, on how to read the tab and interpret that. 1.4 is on timing, time signatures, note values, how to count the notes. 1.5 is on fretting for a clean sound. And many beginning guitar players say, this is impossible. I can't do this. Try to fret all 3 strings or whatever and get a clean sound and make the changes quick enough to stay in time. Well, you can, and frankly, it's not that difficult. And we're only dealing with 3 strings here, so we'll talk about that. I'll give you some tips on how to fret for a clean sound. And then how to use a capo is section 1.6 for changing keys. And I've got a capo chart there so you can figure out what key you'll be in when you capo in different places. Also, the idea of, for a guitar with high action, using a capo to correct the intonation. If the string is pretty high and you push it, you fret it almost anywhere, you're stretching that string just to get down to the fingerboard. Well, if you put a capo on the first fret, retune so that it's correct, now your action's pretty low and you'll have good intonation. Chapter 2 on basic techniques. So we get the basics out of the way in terms of strings and all that kind of stuff. In Chapter 2, we start getting into basic techniques. How to use a slide, how to choose a slide in terms of its mass and the texture of the surface and its smoothness and all that, the material it's made out of, and bottleneck slide versus lap steel. And then how to make a clean sound with a slide in terms of pressure, the amount of pressure you use, how you hold it, and in terms of damping the string behind the slide to get rid of unwanted sounds. 2.2 is on embellishments, hammer-ons, pull-offs, and bends. 2.3, bright and mellow sounds. We only have 3 strings, so we try to get the most that we can out of it and make a pleasing sound. Well, you can control the harmonic content of the string by how you play it. So we'll give some examples of that. Natural and artificial harmonics. And I always like to say, frankly, that artificial harmonics are just as natural as natural harmonics. We just have a different name for it. We'll talk about that and how to do that. Using vibrato for a natural sound, A clean, we go for clean playing, but we don't want to sound like a machine. So vibrato can imitate the human voice and the fluctuations there. We'll talk about how broad it should be, how quick it should be. Vibrato on a fretted string with your left hand, vibrato with a slide, and also vibrato on an open string, and how you can use that. 2.6, incorporating dynamics for variety and interest. I don't know if you've ever heard a speaker who kind of like just drones on and on and on and puts you to sleep. Even if it's a topic you're interested in, he'll put you to sleep. Well, the same thing in music, in performance. We want to have some dynamics, some variety in there. And so we'll talk about how to introduce those and where you would introduce different dynamics. Another interesting little topic in 2.7 is using punctuation. You think, well, I look at my music and I don't see any commas or periods or exclamation points, but they're there. Just like any book you read or story, or even in a human conversation. We may not say the word comma, but there are commas, there are pauses. And so if you interpret your music, even writing in the punctuation to remind yourself, it's going to make a more interesting performance out of it. Chapter 3, now we get into the finger picking. We get into finger picking with a steady bass. And we're going to compare the Piedmont style, typically alternating thumb with a ragtime feel, to the Delta style with typically a steady bass, monotonic bass, thumping bass, and where the 3-string cigar box guitar fits in with that. I like to play alternating thumb bass or Travis style, but I like to have some strings to alternate between. Well, with a 4-string cigar box guitar, you got 2 bass strings to do that with. With a 3-string, I find it more convenient just to use that thumping bass. It still gives you a wonderful rhythmic sound. So that's chapter 3, blues styles. How to use the steady bass and then introduce some treble, some licks on top of that. What typically happens is you get this, it's pretty easy to get a nice steady bass, even with some muting going on. But then when you start introducing the fingers, then the thumb wants to stop. So I've designed some exercises to get you up over that hump. So we can have that automatic thumb that keeps on going, and then we can do other things for melody and harmony with the fingers. And to kind of bring that together, we'll do several different licks with a steady bass. Then we'll combine those into a little song I call the 10-Mile Stomp. In fact, let me just have you hear this so you get the idea of what I'm talking about. This is going to be the 10-Mile Stomp, and I take a little banjo break in there too, but just to show you how other instruments go very well with the cigar box guitar. Session 3.3, incorporating natural sounds. Now, again, this one may seem a little bit strange, but a lot of times we incorporate natural sounds in songs. Last winter, water was dripping off my porch as the snow was melting, and it was making kind of an interesting sound. Drip, 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 drip. And I thought, that's got kind of a rhythm to it. Let me see if I can use that as Nature's Drummer is what I call the song. It's actually the 10 Mile Stomp with the dripping gutter as my drummer. If you look on YouTube, you'll see all kinds of interesting and funny things like that, incorporating other sounds. There's one group has an old tractor that's going chug, 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 and they use that as a drummer. There's another guy that I saw playing to cows in the pasture. It's very funny. He starts playing, and all the cows come around to the fence to listen. So he's interacting somehow with nature. A friend of mine takes his banjo out into his garden and starts playing, and he swears to me that the birds start singing along with him. So a little bit of maybe it's kind of a funny thing, but trying to incorporate natural sounds into your cigar box guitar playing can be a fun exercise. Chapter 4, a little bit of music theory. Not a lot, but a little bit, especially the major scale, where it is on the fingerboard of the guitar. And this relates to chord construction. How do you know which notes you're going to use for certain chords? And also it relates to improvisation. So you're going to play different licks, major and minor licks. You know, major lick with a third in there, and minor lick with a flat third. Chapter 5, regarding the blues, introducing the 12-bar blues. And we'll go ahead and we'll just strum through the blues form first. Then we'll add a little pick pattern to it and add some embellishments on top of that. And we'll be playing the blues. Also, I'll give you a lot of blues licks, and then we'll combine those licks into a 12-bar solo. So that's in Chapter 5. And we end up Chapter 5 with 4 different jam sessions. So now you get a chance to try the licks and your solos and other things. Just, pattern pick through the form and all that, changing some things. So it's going to be some jam sessions to practice with. All right, so we're going to cover quite a few things regarding the 3-string cigar box guitar. All this stuff is really beginner level stuff, so don't be afraid to jump in, and let's start to play the 3-string cigar box guitar.